And hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat. We're talking It's Knowledge. And today we're going to be sharing that knowledge with our one and only Lesley Price. How are you, Lesley?
I'm very good, thank you, Rick. I'm delighted with the guests we have on today.
Yeah, with somebody that you know very well.
Incredibly well. Jo Cook.
Okay, now tell me, she's not Scottish, right?
No, she's not Scottish.
Not Scottish.
But she could be. She could be she'd be a welcome Celt.
It can be an honorary Celt.
An honorary Celt, yeah. And as far as I'm concerned, you call me the sort of the Emma Peel, the Queen of e-learning.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned, Jo is the queen of the virtual classroom. And she is one of the best known people in the UK, and also developing a reputation worldwide for her skills in working within the virtual classroom. And it's not the same as the real classroom.
No, it isn't.
It's a different skill set, and Jo will tell you all about it.
That sounds good. Well, let's do our intro and let's get going. And we are back, and we have a person in the position of power today.
Yeah,
Lesley, would you do the honor?
My very dear friend and colleague, Jo Cook, also known as Lightbulb Jo, Lightbulb Moment. I don't quite know where the light bulb comes from, but I'm sure Jo would love to tell us. But Jo is as far as I'm concerned, and an awful lot of not only the e-learning community in the UK, but worldwide, Jo's skills and expertise are second to none in the virtual classroom. It's a different skill set, it's a new skill set, and that is something that Jo is now not only experienced in, but is sharing. Jo also is a deputy editor on the Training Journal, which is a very well-known publication in the UK. So over to you, Jo.
Wow, Lesley, what an introduction. I'm really not sure I can follow up from that, but I'll certainly do my best. Thank you very much. So where did the light bulb come from? Well, when I was looking for a name for my company, I was obviously thinking for 6 weeks, 6 months, 8 months. There's my neighbour's dog on cue, which is brilliant. And I was thinking for ages and ages and ages, something that was kind of general and universal, but at the same time really spoke to what we do in learning and development. And all of a sudden I had a light bulb moment, which was about Lightbulb Moment. So that's where Lightbulb Jo came from. And now I'm absolutely obsessed with light bulbs, and my entire house is full of light bulb decoration, and my other half is getting very annoyed at it all.
Oh, that's funny. Now, you know, the light bulbs, like they used to make them where everybody had the light bulb moment. Now they're kind of really yucky, mercury-ridden. They're not what they used to be.
No, they're not yucky light bulb moments for me.
No, I love the old light bulb. That's a great name for a company, by the way. Absolutely clever.
Thank you. I really enjoy it. It's about helping other people to get those light bulb moments themselves.
If we can start off, Jo, one of the things that I'm always asked all the time is that people make, and you know my old saying, to assume is to make an ass out of me and you. And one of the things that people assume is that the skills required for teaching and learning in a classroom, a standard classroom environment, are the same. And you can just immediately transfer those to online. And I keep saying to people, no. So it'd be great if you could give us some of your insights into what you see as the differences.
Absolutely. And so you're completely right. It's not exactly the same skill set at all. What's really important to know, first of all, though, is that you absolutely can use your skill set from instructional design, graphic design, all of your learning and development knowledge, classroom management knowledge, all of those things you absolutely can use in a webinar or a virtual classroom. So a virtual classroom is a live online experience, a little bit like a webinar, but you usually have less people, 6, 8, 10, maybe 12 people. And so it's a much smaller environment than you would have with maybe a public webinar with hundreds, thousands of people. And so you do need all those skills. So having taught people who are maybe presenters or subject matter experts, they actually then have to learn all of the L&D, all of the training or teaching element as well. So you do need that foundation of skills. That's really important. But you're absolutely right. There are new skills that you just need to layer and layer on top. Yeah. Very obviously, one of those is technology that we have to get comfortable with and know how to use. But others are just how do you deliver in a different modality? So all of the basics are the same about involving people and getting them to do activities and where you focus. But then the nuance and the polish is very different about how you go about designing and facilitating that.
So what tips do you have there, Jo? Because I mean, I've been on, I mean, I've taken part in, and obviously I now co-host this with Rick. So I appreciate there is a difference. But when I'm doing this, I'm not also on the chat to everybody. Whereas I know in a lot of live online classroom, you know, the live online classroom and the live webinars where there is a big chat facility, you've got to keep an eye on that too.
Yeah, you absolutely do. So it depends on whether you're doing a webinar or a virtual classroom. They are very different beasts. It's a bit like saying a car and a truck are the same thing. And it's just like, well, they both go on the road, you both have a steering wheel, but there's lots of stuff that's very different. So if you're running a webinar and you're expecting hundreds of people and you have an open chat window, which you should have, then if you are presenting information, you can't possibly look at what 100 or 200 people are typing in the chat window at the same time. So that's where you need a host or a producer or a moderator, and you need to plan your interactions really carefully. But if we focus on the virtual classroom, where you're much more likely to have, let's say, 8 people or 10 people, that's when you can pay attention to the chat window. I'm not going to lie, it's different. And when you first get into it, you might be kind of going, oh, how do I do this? There's all of this to look at. But just like when we first started driving a car and we had to deal with pedals and gear sticks and the different dials in front of us and looking at all of the traffic, we learned each of those things as we went along and became comfortable and confident with them. And then we put them all together, and with experience, we became, hopefully, a competent driver. And the virtual classroom is just the same.
So, but one of the big questions that, I mean, I know I lectured for years, and one of the things I always used to look at, and I say, you've met Natalie, my daughter, who is a teacher, and she and I talk about this all the time, is the eye contact that you have with your learners and the body language that you have with your learners. And both in webinars and the virtual classroom, you don't really have that. So how does that figure into the equation?
Really, really good point. And that's one of the biggest challenges that people have when they go from 10, 15, 20 years of face-to-face classroom and they're faced with then a virtual classroom, is they say, well, I can't see the whites of people's eyes. I can't feed off of their body language and their energy. I can't see if they're paying attention or if they've got a question. And they're absolutely right about all of those things, and to be aware of those. So what we have to do is kind of really deconstruct what it is we do face-to-face to understand what are we doing at various points and what are we trying to achieve, and then rebuild that in the virtual classroom. And I've been doing some research and writing recently about digital body language and how important that is for us to be able to see the equivalence. So an example that I usually use is that if I was running a face-to-face session, I'd probably be looking around the room at different people and just assessing, you know, are they frowning? Do they look involved? Are they thoughtful? Are they getting it? Do they have a question? And I'm interpreting that body language. And online, what I can do is my version of looking around for that is I have to ask a question and get some interaction. So it could be something really quick and simple, like green tick or green check mark if you agree about this. or type in the chat window your experience of that, or click on this poll, or do this whiteboard, something along those lines. And the more of those you build in, and they can be really small and simple and build up literally every couple of minutes, that is giving me my feedback. So even something simple like click on the arrow tool with your name on it, there are some good people that are going to do that really quickly because they've got a handle on the technology, and some people are going to do it slowly. And then it's up to me to interpret that, just like any other body language. Do they have their arms crossed because they're bored, or they're frustrated, or because their shoulders hurt, or because they're cold? So if they're slow to click on the arrow, even just a simple example like that, is it because they're bored and doing something else? Or is it because English isn't their first language and they're translating something, or they're making notes and they've just got to pick up the mouse again? So it's all about finding the equivalent. And I find that I can feed off the energy of people, I can know what's going on, and I get my equivalents to face, to the point that when I'm presenting, as I do quite a lot, as you know, face to face, I now miss the chat room because I kind of see all the faces looking around, and I'm thinking, I don't know what they're thinking, because if they had a chat room, they could type it and I could see and I would know what they're thinking.
Well, you know what you could do is give...
Over to you, Rick, at that point.
Well, I was just thinking...
Because I find that so funny.
I was just thinking you could create the virtual classroom. So what you have is give everybody an iPad or a phone, have them in the chat, and as you're giving the talk, you can talk to them individually via the chat. That would be kind of fun.
That's Twitter.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of stuff that you can do there, isn't there?
No, it's sort of interesting, and you're right. You don't. I mean, really, what you have is your voice. When you're talking, you've got your voice, inflection, whatever else you can do with that. But a lot of the good virtual classroom tools have a lot of engagement possibilities, and that's where it can get fun and interesting. Do you have a virtual classroom that you like in particular, a software tool?
Yeah, so there's loads and loads of different ones out there, and definitely it's about finding the right set of features, the platform, the price, the amount of people that can join. Is there a download? Are there VPN and firewall issues? Lots of things to choose between in your platforms. And there are some really good webinar platforms like Webinar Jam, Webinar Ninja, and they're really good for lots of people. There's things like Crowdcast, which are good for more kind of webcasts and chats, a little bit like what we're doing now. There's also the big names of things like Zoom, WebEx, and Adobe Connect, and the GoTo suite, obviously. So they're the big ones that people talk about. Personally, I don't like GoToWebinar very much because it doesn't have a chat window, and I think that's absolutely essential. I do like Zoom, although there are some kind of clunky bits about it, but I think it's a really good option for people. The two I've used the longest and the most, and therefore probably that's why they're my favourites, are actually WebEx Training Centre and Adobe Connect. Both of them have got some really good features, but as with any software, there's things where I think, oh, if only Adobe Connect did this in the same way that WebEx did, or if only WebEx did this in the same way that Zoom does, or if only it had this feature that's in Webinar Jam. So there's no perfect software, but it's about what you have already, maybe. So Skype for Business is a really good example. It's not the best virtual classroom tool, but if you have it already, you can leverage it to start doing maybe some smaller activities, some smaller sessions to really kind of get into it and get people used to that idea.
Yeah.
What would you say, Joe, are the best way? Because I think it's as people become, more and more people are working remotely. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. I think that's just the way our world is going. You've got more and more people working remotely rather than traveling in, even if it's only 1 or 2 days a week, rather than traveling into the office. What would you say is the best way for people to learn these skills? Because I don't just think it's a learning and development thing. I think it's also a management tool for people to work with their teams. So A, would you agree with that? And B, how do people learn it?
So absolutely agree with it. And, you know, if you go and search for conference call on YouTube, there's that really funny video of what a conference call is like in real life. And it's all about connection issues and people not knowing etiquette and all sorts of different things. I think that's a huge challenge. You're absolutely right, more people are working from home, although big companies like, I think it was Yahoo and IBM are actually bringing people more into the business again. So there's different trends going in different ways. But this is about, therefore, making sure that people are still valued, listened to and communicated with whilst they're working from home, or certainly when they're away from the home office or wherever the manager is. And that could include managers in, say, the US with teams that are in other countries in Europe or Asia or Australasia. So absolutely, it's really important that we get used to using things like community and chat facilities. So that could be things like Slack, enterprise networks. Yammer is a really big one that people know of and have used a lot, or Skype messages and having video calls, but also having those meetings online. And one of the key things, again, is mastering the technology. If you know how to get people connected, to get the audio connected, to give people the instructions they need, to be able to pay attention to a chat window where somebody's typing, I haven't got audio. And then you've got the manager saying, right, everybody's here, let's get started, because they aren't paying attention to the chat window. You know, some of those things are relatively basic from my point of view, but they're not basic when you haven't done them before and you don't know what you don't know. So there's a digital skills element here, and the more we do in work and the more we do remotely and with technology, I think the bigger that skills gap gets for a lot of people.
Now, Joe, how did you wind up getting into the virtual side of things?
Well, that's really interesting because I did not want to get into the virtual side of things. I was working as a face-to-face trainer, and what I was doing was sort of looking at my career trajectory and going, where do I want this to go? And I wanted to stick with the face-to-face training. I wanted to work much more on kind of leadership development, soft skills. And I was finishing a contract at the company, and I went on a course with Colin Steed, who Lesley obviously mentions quite a lot. And I thought I was going to learn a little bit about e-learning. Now, e-learning isn't my thing. I've done some e-learning stuff, but there's such a separation between me and a live user that I had decided, even with my IT skills and design skills and other bits and pieces that I can do, that wasn't my thing. It didn't excite me. And so when I went on this course with Colin Steed, I suddenly went, oh, wow, so there are real people, even though we've got a computer? And I was just sold. And by the end of that, I did my assessment. I was one of the very few people to get distinction. And then basically Colin messaged me over the weekend and offered me a job. So it was largely thanks to Colin, it must be said, to get the ball rolling. And he did an awesome job with that. And from there, it was about going out and doing loads of different projects, loads of work with different companies, and just build that skill set up around virtual classrooms, webinars, expanding the digital skill set and the digital kind of learning and the blended options that people are doing, working with Training Journal, for example, and I'm now, as Lesley says, deputy editor, and getting involved in lots of different projects. So it's really the experience and the breadth and the variety that are really important for any kind of career development, but certainly that's how...
Yeah, the other thing you need to know, Rick, is, I mean, obviously you and I know Brent Schlenker very well. But when Brent and Lewis Malbus set up the training, learning and development community, you know, a few years ago, they involved me from the very beginning. And I'm absolutely delighted that Joe is now a huge part of that and is going to be running the first TLDC meetup in London next week.
Yeah. Really exciting. So I've guest hosted for Brent a few times, which is absolutely a complete honour, and really enjoy working with Brent and Louise, and myself, Cara North, who's based in Ohio, and Bethany Taylor, who's based in Scotland. We are all hosting the UK meetup, which is the 21st of June. So that's next Thursday.
Oh, fun.
Evening in London. Loads of conversations. Leslie's going to be there, so it'll be a good evening, I can tell you that.
And it's also Joe's birthday, so it's got to be a very good evening.
Yes, it is. It's a big birthday as well.
So what do you think, Rick, about the fact that Joe is connecting with organizations like TLDC in the States and now joining up in the UK? Isn't that just amazing?
I think it's good. I think we are becoming a very small world in just about every way.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how that's been through. I mean, TLDC is a daily webcast, and what we're doing is a UK meetup. So whilst I'm well known for virtual classrooms and webinars, actually it's about having a UK face-to-face meetup. I run a personal learning network in the UK in my county. I've started another one in the county that I was born in, that actually my business operations manager has taken over now. So it's actually more about connections and relationships and conversations. And I think, as you say, talk is knowledge, and that's so important. And I think that's another area that people don't realize in things like the virtual classroom. They think it's all lecture or delivery or presenting at people. But I'm all about the activities and what could they say and what discussion can we have. And then, we were talking before we started recording about blended learning. It's like, put that video out there, give them a podcast, give them something to read about, an e-learning module, but then use your virtual classroom time or your face-to-face time, it's not all about virtual, and actually use that for a really good quality discussion and applying the things that you're talking about.
Yep, that sounds great. Totally agree.
You must have more questions, Rick. I've kind of been dominating this one.
Oh, no, I don't want to get between you two. Not at all. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no, you won't get between Joe and I. I just think it's interesting. What are your views? Have you experienced virtual classroom before, Rick?
Who, me? Yeah, I used to teach how to teach in a virtual classroom. I did it for Adobe for about a year. So,
well, there you go, Joe. You've got a new connection.
Yeah, we used to.
There we go. If I need some tips, Rick, I know where I'm coming.
I don't think you need tips, but no, we did it with Adobe Connect, and it was part of a marketing group, but it was also training, if you will, on how to keep something engaging, how to make something interesting. And it was a lot of fun. We had experience teaching in virtual classrooms, but this was more of a webinar kind of thing. We had a lot of content, and we would pull out different content. And again, like Joe said, you don't have that visual where they are. You start kind of getting the intuition of what are they doing? What can you switch your camera if you have a camera to them? Can you do different things? And it was all about keeping it moving, keeping it going, a lot of interactivity, a lot of questions, polls, surveys, this, that, and just making sure that they don't have too much time to sit and think and get bored, because it's easy to lose people in today's day and age on emails, and especially emails. They're gone. It's like, oh, got to answer an email. And I've been told that something I used to do was considered rude today. I disagree, but I would occasionally ask people a question directly to that particular user. Go, well, that's so rude. Why is it rude? You're asking a question. But it's a surprise. No, it's a question. It doesn't matter, because a lot of people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing in the middle of a class and not paying any attention. So you could choose somebody and just say, hey, what do you think about that, John? And it's like, what? But I've been told by people that's considered rude. Like I said, I don't agree with that. I think part of that's...
I don't agree either.
No, I think part of it's keeping it going and making sure people are engaged. They're awake. They haven't totally fallen asleep. And but it was fun. I had a blast doing it. And the virtual classroom doesn't have to be a terrible experience for people. Like a lot of people think, oh, my God, how am I going to do this? I don't see anybody. They don't know who I am. I don't know about... It's fun. It's just like a phone almost like a conference call, but that's interactive. And I don't know. I enjoyed it. I had a good time doing it, and I don't know. I had no other way to gauge really how well I did other than by comments people made. One thing that we did well at was keep people involved. These Adobe things had anywhere from about 200 to about 500 people. And so the only way we know we did a good job is how many people could we retain there for the whole time. And that was tricky. I had no idea how to retain anybody for any period of time. I'd never really done a webinar like that. And we wound up having literally, if we had like a 400-person webinar, we had 1 or 2 people leave, and that was it. And I went, wow. I was actually shocked that we were able to either maintain that long or they all fainted and just gave up. I wasn't sure which.
The computer connected.
You just don't know. But the whole idea was connecting. It's connecting, being yourself. Don't try to be anybody you're not. Keeping it interesting. Try to use humor if you feel comfortable with it. Try to use things that make people relax, get them involved. And you said exactly the right thing, Joe. It's just do questions that get them involved, or answers, or in the chat box. And we had a mediator, so we had somebody that could always answer the chat box, which for me is good because my eyes aren't that good. And if I'm looking at small print while I'm trying to talk and do a class, it's not going to happen. I'm going to be leaning into my screen too close. So we had a moderator who would just say, oh, we've got a question in the chat room. So we do. Sometimes we take questions later. Other times we take them at the moment. And it was, I just thought it was a lot of fun. How did you feel?
Joe? Do you think you need a combination of both? Do you think like a moderator that Rick was talking about, do you think that's absolutely necessary even in a small group?
So it depends. I mean, in what Rick was talking about, the webinar with lots of people, absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And if you're having 200, 500 people, whatever it might be, then you probably need your host, your producer, your moderator in the chat, and actually have different people doing different jobs, because it will get so busy that you can't have one person doing all of it. And I've hosted and produced webinars like that, and by the end of it, I've gone, oh, I can't cope with this.
There's a lot of little things going on, and then of course you've got the software, which doesn't always cooperate.
No. It's always perfect.
Always perfect. Perfect.
We love technology.
Yes.
But also,
I like the way you said that, Lesley. That was a we love technology.
When it's all working, we love the technology.
Yeah, when it works. Oh, I've had Connect rooms crash on us literally 5 minutes before a large webinar, and we're like, ah. And thanks to the producer and director, they were able to rebuild it literally within minutes. And otherwise, I'd just be sitting there going, well, that was a fun webinar. Sorry nobody showed up, but hey, we'll do it next week.
And this is about knowing your software. I mean, if you're the producer or the host, or to come back to Lesley's point, if you're doing it on your own, you have to know it really well. Because if that happens, you have to be able to rescue it and be flexible in the moment and do something. Now, arguably, if you're the presenter or the subject matter expert, that's probably not your role. And as you said, you've got somebody else that does that for you. But if it's you on your own, delivering your twice a month, twice a week, twice a day virtual classroom, then you've got to be the one who knows what you're doing. What I always say to people when I'm training teams of people is, yes, you absolutely can deliver these on your own. You've got 8 or 10 people, you're delivering your topic. If you learn the software and practice the skills, you can do that. But it's a little bit scary, and actually it can be a little bit lonely at first until you get into it, and it can be a little bit stressful. So what I really recommend is that they do have maybe a host or producer, and the producer is really the person with the technical knowledge to help them. But also if they're in teams and the format is that they're not going to have a producer, because let's face it, then on your 2-hour session or your 1-hour session, you've got 2 people, which doubles the resource that you need, and not everyone can afford to do that. Yep. So if you know that that's not the case, at least in your learning phase, if you can co-deliver with somebody, so even if they're going to be a subject matter expert or a presenter or a facilitator in another topic or another session, they can be your producer today and you're their producer tomorrow. You'll support each other and you will learn so much more and debrief. So I've been running Lightbulb Moment for 5 years, and most of that 5 years I've been delivering entirely on my own, doing all of the technical stuff, producing, hosting, and the facilitation. But now I've got my business operations manager working with me, and I've been training him up as a producer, and he's actually a really good producer, which is excellent. And because he's working with me and he provides another set of eyes, and I think you misinterpreted that question, and you've missed this question, and you're behind time or you're ahead of time, and the debrief afterwards, we always immediately have a conversation to say what we went well, what didn't go so well, what we can learn and change. Yeah. The last year I've been doing that with somebody else, and everything has just gone even more amazing in that last year because I'm working with someone else. So I really strongly recommend that if it's at all possible.
That's great.
And if I'm going to get my old learning head on, going back to my old days when I was lecturing and whatever, I would describe that as being a reflective practitioner.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know nowadays when people are thinking about e-learning, whether they also, you know, when I was lecturing face to face to, you know, whether it be 20, whether it be 200, one of the things that I was taught to do was be that reflective practitioner. So even when you left your one-to-one tutorials or you left your lecture with 200, you had somebody in the team that you used to just go and have a quick 5-10 minute chat to, even in the coffee room, about what worked, what didn't, what could I do differently. And I think that reflective practitioner is really important. And I just hope, I do wonder with e-learning courses, when people are instructional designers, whether that skill is being slightly lost. And I hope in the virtual classroom that it's not.
I think you've got a great point about e-learning, because what I hear from a lot of people who work in various roles in an e-learning company or as an instructional designer is that depending on the role and the process and the company and the client, sometimes they don't get the feedback loop. So you might have designed your module and put it up on whatever software and it gets rolled out to the LMS, and by then you're on to the next project. And actually you don't get to know what the usage stats are, what the past stats are, you know, even just what people think about it and the testing from it. So therefore you don't get that information to then be able to reflect, other than, I didn't like that question, when you're doing that yourself. So that's not the same for all people, obviously, but for some people that's certainly the case. And I'd like to think with webinars and virtual classrooms, even if you're doing it on your own, there's that time once everybody's logged out, hopefully there's that 10-15 minutes where people can kind of go, whew, you know, pop to the loo, get a drink, and then kind of have that moment to think, what went well. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is build a community of people so that there's somebody there that you can share that with, so that what you can do is write a little message and say, this didn't feel like it went so well today. Are there any ideas from people? Or there's amazing success and really joyful. And then other people can say, well, what did you do? Share your ideas with us. So I think that's a really important part of our professional development, is to be part of a community like that.
I think Harold has a link, doesn't he, Rick, for Jo's community that she set up. Yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. And if you scroll down, you can see there are going to be some discussions there. There's one actually that's me today asking a question because I couldn't remember something about WebEx, and people asking about what listening activities are there. This is Mike, who's my business operations manager, saying, well, what actually do people think a virtual classroom is? And this is our admin account sort of just sharing some links and stuff there as well. So there's loads of great conversations going on there of people asking questions, sharing successes. And I think this is a really great place to get to know other people, to ask questions, and to be able to also share, because sometimes it can be quite a lonely thing to be an instructional designer, to be the only trainer in the company, to be maybe the only person focusing on the virtual classroom, when actually all the rest of your team are maybe e-learning designers, maybe they're all focusing on face-to-face classrooms. So I wanted a place where people can come and share and discuss.
No, I think that's a really good way. I think it's important that people share, and sometimes in a virtual classroom or a webinar, you can't actually share. You maybe worry about sharing your experience as a learner, but you also can't necessarily share your experiences of being somebody who's delivering it.
Though it is good at the end of a classroom to ask, please leave some comments on what you thought, or put up a question. How did I do today? How was the seminar? How was the classroom? Whatever you're doing, just ask people, and most will actually give you some feedback. And if you have a lot of people, you'll get a lot of feedback, obviously, but even in small groups, medium-sized groups, most people don't mind giving you a little bit of feedback, especially if you make it easy for them. So if you put like some honest responses, and then people can actually click off what they thought was good and bad. And sometimes you'll be surprised at the comments you get. Sometimes they're very positive. Other times you get something that's just, you didn't reach one person the way they thought they should have been reached, and that's okay. And you can just figure out what didn't they like or what did they like. And but it's definitely good. It's a good way to learn from your own performances, because a lot of times when you're teaching or presenting, you're too busy with the content to really focus that much on how well am I doing today? Am I doing, you're having a good or bad day, because we usually have an idea of where we are as far as days. Am I presenting as well as I could? Could I be better? Do I have a class where there's a million questions and they're not really good questions? And how do you get past that? Or how do you take things offline? All the things that happen in a classroom will also happen virtually, just a little bit different.
Yeah. So. Completely agree. I mean, usually you just need another cup of coffee, in my experience.
Yeah.
But further from that, you're absolutely right. We all have days where we're at 90% or 95%, where things just aren't quite gelling, or the group hasn't worked so well, or there's a technical problem right at the beginning that's throwing things off a bit. So you need that reflection time. And if you're working with someone else, then they can provide that for you and help and support you as you will help and support them. And also, you're absolutely right. So things like in your virtual classroom, your chat room, for instance, usually has people's names attached to it. But you can do a whiteboard without people's names, so they can give you anonymous feedback. And that way people can be a little more open and honest. And there's all sorts of other ways that you can ask for feedback as well, but getting that is really important. Some of the things that I do is I go and observe people's sessions, I give them written feedback, we give them coaching on a one-to-one. And so that could be somebody who has or hasn't come through a training program that I've delivered. It could be somebody who just says, can you just pop here for half an hour? I've got this activity, I'm really not sure how it's working, and give it a go, because we need that feedback. There is every year at Training Journal, what we do is a Training Journal virtual Christmas party in December. And it's fun, games, and all sorts of things that go on. And it's really good fun. And there was an activity that I designed. And when I was halfway through running it, I just went, this isn't working. It's like, it's okay, we're muddling through, but it is not what I thought it was. And had I booked in the time to schedule some time with somebody to test it, it would have been obvious in a pilot that it didn't work, and quite frankly, I mucked it up and I should do something different. But it was fine. If you ask anybody about it now, I'm sure they won't remember. I'm the one who remembers, but it just makes me go, okay, I've reflected on that. I know what I need to do better, and it's given me something to learn about and to share as well.
And would you say that your experiences are that almost every classroom, no matter how consistent your teaching is a little bit different?
Of course, absolutely. I used to work for Turner Broadcasting, who owns CNN News and Warner Brothers and all sorts. And I had to do the training on the expenses system, which was terribly exciting. And I ended up doing something like 300 sessions. This is way before the blend and the virtual and all of those things that I got involved in. Absolute madness to do 300 sessions anyway. So all of my off-the-cuff quips were completely scripted, and I said them all. But also every session was still different because the audience was different and the questions were different. Even though on session 300, I was kind of, it's like I know it inside out and backwards now, there would still be questions that I don't know. So absolutely. And that would be the same virtually as well. I've delivered courses where it's the same course I've delivered 200 times. But the audience and the people there always make it a different conversation.
So Joe, the training that you do now, and I genuinely, even though you and I know each other so well, I genuinely don't know the answer to this. Do you do in-house training, or do you do individual training, or do you run group training courses?
So the short answer is all of the above and much more. So typically people come to me with, they need their team developing. So they might be an L&D manager and they've got a team of 4, 5, 10, 50 people that need upskilling in some version of virtual classrooms. It could be subject matter experts, could be trainers, something like that. But that also includes, some people don't have a team. For some people, it's one person. So we focus on doing one-to-ones. One person that I'm going to be working with in September, it's all about the design part of it, and the facilitation is secondary. For other people, it's all about how do we deliver something that another team has designed for us. Usually it is in-house for teams. I don't do public courses, so usually it is, but I do all sorts of different things.
No, I'm just interested because that's something that you and I actually haven't ever talked about before. It's funny what you learn about people when you're online, hey?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, guess what? We are out of time.
We're out of time, I know.
Out of time. That leaves time for another show with you, Jo.
That sounds good to me.
So we appreciate you coming on. Lesley learned a little bit more about you today, so that's actually good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't it funny?
I'll see you next week, my lovely.
Yes.
Yeah, 21st of June in London. Very much looking forward to that. And Rick and Harold and everyone behind the scenes, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.
Oh, our pleasure, and thank you for coming on. It's great, and we look forward to having you on again.
Yeah, me too.
It'll be fun.
Thank you.
Because we're virtually not here. We're just kind of figments of your imagination right now. You do know
Oh my
that.
God, what's wrong with me?
A big box.
Anyway, have a good one. Thank you much. And if you're watching the show, please subscribe. Give us your feedback.
Bye.
And go visit Jo's website. We have links in the show notes below. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.